أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. وصل اللهم على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. Yesterday we covered the section on trust in God, and the next section is called Bab al-Muraqaba. And muraqaba means, yuraqibu means to watch something diligently, to watch it closely. So it's the idea of being vigilant. It's the chapter on vigilance. قوله تبارك وتعالى واتقوا الله الذي تساءلون به والأرحام إن الله كان عليكم رقيبا. التوفيق إذا تحقق العبد بهذه الآية وأمثالها استفاد مقام المراقبة وهو مقام شريف وأصله علم وحال ثم يثمر حالين. أما العلم فهو معرفة العبد لأن الله مطلع عليه ناظر إليه يرى جميع أعماله ويسمع جميع أقواله ويعلم كل ما يخطر على باله. وأما الحال فهو ملازمة هذا العلم للقلب بحيث يغلب عليه ولا يغفر عنه. ولا يكفي العلم دون هذه، فإذا حصل العلم والحال كانت ثمرتها عند أصحاب اليمين الحياء من الله، وهو يوجب بالضرورة ترك المعاصي والجد في الطاعات، وكانت ثمرتها عند المقربين المشاهدة التي توجب التعظيم والإجلال لذي الجلال. So he says, glory and blessed is he, and have taqwa of Allah, the one you ask one another in his name, and also fear the kinship bonds. So guard your kinship bonds, because Allah is watching over everything. التوفيق إذا تحقق العبد. So then he says tawfiq, success is when the servant realizes this ayah and ayahs similar to it, these verses, and in doing so he achieves the station of muraqaba. So muraqaba is a station that is achieved by recognizing that Allah is aware of everything that we do. And this is a noble and exalted station. Its origin or its root is both a knowledge and a state. So it's both a knowledge and a state. You have knowledge of something, but then that knowledge is transmitted into actually your behavior. There's a lot of people that know things, but they don't implement those things. So he's saying this is both a knowledge and a state. And this combination of a knowledge of a state engenders or brings to fruition two other states. So this awareness of Allah subhanahu, knowing that God sees you, but also having that state in which not only do you have the knowledge, but that knowledge accompanies your state. So you're aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is watching you. And then he says, as for the knowledge, it is this gnosis, this ma'rifah of the servant that Allah is observing everything he does, constantly watching him, sees all of his actions, hears all of his words, and knows everything that occurs to his own heart. He knows his innermost consciousness. And nobody knows that except Allah. Even shaitan has no access to your consciousness. He can whisper and you can hear things, but shaitan does not know what your thoughts are. There's something which is called a kashf, where sometimes, like reading thoughts, things like that, those can happen, but those aren't things that people know. People don't know what's going on in your heart, but sometimes there's an unveiling, somebody that's shown to them, and sometimes they don't even know it. So they'll say something, and you'll realize that's exactly what I was thinking, but they might not be aware. It's Allah that's doing that. So, and then he says, as for the state, the hal, it is that this knowledge accompanies the heart always. So you can know something, like for instance, Heidegger talks about ready at hand and present at hand, the philosopher Heidegger. Like there's a lot of things that we know that are ready at hand. So you're driving down the road and your tire pops. Well, you've got all this knowledge ready at hand when that happens. So you pull over, you know not to put your brakes on, you pull over, you go in, you get your thing out, you know how to put it under, you raise the tire up. That's all knowledge. That's called ready at hand. A lot of people have masses of knowledge like that, ready at hand. This knowledge is present at hand. That's the difference. That's what a hal is. It's when the knowledge that you have, like, see, I can say to you, you could be doing something, and I say, yeah, akhi, Allah is watching you, and you know that, and now I've brought that knowledge that was ready at hand to present at hand for you by reminding you. وَذَكِّرْ فَإِنَّ الذِّكْرَ تَنْفَعُ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. Remind people because reminders benefit believers. So you can have that ready at hand knowledge reminded to you by somebody. But this is knowledge that's present at hand. It doesn't leave you. You're in that state of awareness. It's the awareness. See, animals, and I really like this analogy, that animal, that's one of the things that's really striking about animals. In Zen Buddhism, the cat is very important. Because the cat, if you watch and observe the cat is the metaphor for the muraqaba. If you watch a cat with a bird, they just sit there and they watch the bird. And right when they sense the bird is slightly heedless, they pounce and they get the bird. Same with the rat. The cat is, it's a type of a presence that the cat has that's really extraordinary. But most animals, if you watch them in their natural habitats, they're always vigilant about their surrounding. Animals don't go into ghafla. The animals that do are like cows, goats, but even there, they've got an awareness, but they kind of go into their sleep mode. But animals out there like rabbits, rabbits, you can watch them. They're like, when they're eating, they've got their radar. Really, they're moving their ears around because if they hear the slightest thing, they know. And that their life depends on it. That's why they're in that state. They have very heightened awareness of what's around them. That's muraqaba. It's when you're aware that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala not only is present, but can seize you at any moment. That Allah can pull you into the divine presence at any moment. And what is your state at that moment? Because the state at the moment of death is your most important state. That's the most important state. That's why one of the signs of the end of time is sudden death. It's not a blessing to have sudden death. It's much better to be prepared for death's coming. But once you're aware that sudden death is a very real part of the world, it's good to be aware of your state at any given time. So that's really what he's talking about. It's becoming aware of one's state. And that it's a constant awareness that accompanies the heart. It overwhelms him. So this state of awareness becomes overwhelming. And he's not heedless about this state. So it's moving out of ghafla. Ghafla is the source of human suffering and pain and all these things. It's this heedlessness. It's an unawareness. And ghafla in the Quran, many verses about ghafla. The Quran talks about the iqtarabat as-sa'a, the end of time is drawing near, which is our death. It's not just the end of time, the big end of time. There's also the lesser end of time, which is our death. The end of time is drawing near. Your end of time, where you're not going to have any more time left, is drawing near. But people are in ghafla. وَهُمْ فِي غَفْلَةٍ مُعْرِضُونَ يَقْتَرَبَتْ لِلنَّاسِ حِسَابُهُمْ. Their reckoning is drawing near, but they're in ghafla. They're in this heedlessness. So one of the things about the Quran is it's actually revealed to get us out of our states of heedlessness, and that's why it's called the dhikr. It's called a dhikr. Now, dhakara means to remember. So the idea is that we already know these truths. Our souls know these truths, but because we've come into this world and the world is a place of forgetfulness, like Thackeray's The Vanity Fair. It becomes a place where we get caught up in all the comings and goings of the pageant play of life on earth. And so people get caught up in all those things. They lose their awareness. So the idea is coming back to this awareness, which is what dhikr does. And then he says, وَلَا يَكْفِ الْعِلْمَ دُونَ هَذِهِ. But knowledge, it's not enough to have knowledge of this. You can know this, but it's ready at hand. This is something that has to be present at hand. And that is, and then he says, so when the knowledge and the state, this state, are achieved, when the two come together, when the present at hand knowledge the ready at hand knowledge becomes present at hand, it's there. Then, according to the Ashab al-Yamin, the fruit of this is two. It bears two fruits. The first is al-haya min Allah, modesty before God. The Prophet ﷺ had the most modesty. They said, أَشَدُّ حَيَاءً مِنَ الْعَذْرَاءِ فِي خِدْرِهَا. He had more modesty than a virgin who had yet to come out. Because young girls in that culture, they didn't come out. Once they married, and then they could come and sit with the men, things like that. But before that, they didn't. It was a very cloistered culture in that way. So a girl like that, who'd never been around men other than her direct relatives, would be very shy and modest by nature. So that's how they described the modesty of the Prophet ﷺ, that his modesty was he was more modest than a young virgin girl who had yet to come out to society. That's the state of his modesty. And that was with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet ﷺ said every religion has a quality or a characteristic, and the characteristic of my religion is modesty, which is why clothes are very important in our religion. It's not that there's anything evil about the body. The body is so powerful. See, that's what people don't realize. I mean, advertisers realize it. But the body is such a glorious creation. There's nothing like the human body. No animal compares. The human body, especially when it's in very fine form, we're in awe of it. That's why it's such a captivating thing. I mean, the Greeks worshipped the human body. So the power of the human body is that it's not that it's a vile or a low thing. No, it's like the Kaaba. You keep the Kaaba behind the black veil as a way of honoring this extraordinary thing and giving it haiba. Because once you take that away, it loses its haiba. It loses, the power of it diminishes. You're taking it away. It's the same with the Kaaba. If you took the black cloak off the Kaaba, people would get used to just seeing the stones. But the black veil is what gives it this extraordinary presence in the hearts of people. So the body is like that, and that's why modesty is such an important aspect of our religion, of being modest, lowering the eyes. So then he says, that's the first one. وَهُوَ يُوجِبُ بِالضَّرُورَةِ تَرْكَ الْمَعَاصِي. And by necessity, the result of that is people they don't disobey Allah. Because if you're aware of God, and you're aware of the maharim of God, I mean, a student came to a Shaykh and he told me he was going on a journey, and he asked him for advice, and he said, if you ever feel tempted to disobey God, just make sure you find a place where no one can see you. And when he came back, he asked him, and he said that he didn't disobey Allah on the journey because he couldn't, anytime that temptation came up, he realized there was no place where he wasn't aware. That's the hal that he's talking about, becoming aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in that way. And the second is to become energetic and serious in your obedience to God. So you have more energy to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَكَانَتْ ثَمْرَتُهَا عِنْدَ الْمُقَرَّبِينَ الْمُشَاهَدَةِ. And then the fruit of this amongst those who are in distinct proximity to God. So these are the muqarrabeen, In the Christian tradition, they're called the cherubim, the same root word. The closest to God are the muqarrabin. From the angels, the cherubim, and from men and women, they're the most righteous people. The fruit of theirs is mushahada. It's a witnessing. التي توجب التعظيم. It engenders or necessitates this magnification, this exaltation of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and this majesty, لِذِي الْجَلَالِ, for the one who possesses majesty. And that's why وَمَنْ يُعَظِّمْ شَعَائِرَ اللَّهِ فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ تَقْوَى الْقُلُوبِ. Those who magnify the symbols of God, it's the fruit of the taqwa that's in their hearts. So when you have this presence and awareness of God, you begin to magnify those things. You won't put the Quran down. You won't throw it down. You won't, when you see it near your feet, you'll elevate it. Those things become part of your awareness. When you're with the people of Allah, you're more present, and you have an awareness of being in their presence and the blessing of their presence. Those are all the results of a heart that's in a state of mushahada. And then the people of mushahada, when you visit them, things happen to you. Because what's called the lata'if, which are centers in your spiritual state that open up. So you become open to things that you weren't open to before. Words take on new meanings. Unveilings happen, and a spiritual movement occurs in the heart that can be very powerful. Sometimes it's overwhelming. Some people can't handle it. They just pass out. I mean, people that go into the Kaaba, they just pass out. There's people, they just faint, just going into the Kaaba. It's too much. And there's other people that are present. And then there's some people that the lata'if are so closed, they're not open to those experiences. They don't have those experiences because they haven't done the work. Some people, they're more open than others, not because they did any work, but sometimes it has to do with their ancestors. They could have righteous people in their past that did a lot of work, and so it's a way of Allah honors those people by kana abuhuma salihah. The Quran says that the two orphans, that they had a righteous ancestor, the seventh grandfather. So Khidr did something for them, not for them. It was for their ancestor. So sometimes you have that. Other times, certain people, East Africans generally, in my experience, especially black African, but Africans generally are very open to the unseen realm. They have a lot of dreams. And if you have any Somali friends, you might be aware of this. Somali people have the most amazing dreams. It's part of, different people have different gifts. People like Persians have their gifts. Europeans have their gifts, even within Europe. In the 16th, 15th, 16th century, the best carriages in Europe were from Germany. All the royalty this is not real, it's real. All the royalty in Europe had German carriages. What is that? They're still doing it. With the Mercedes and the BMW. What is that in the German nature that has that incredible dedication to engineering and to perfection in even their music? There's no classical music that equals the German composers. None, which is related to that in a lot of ways. It's about harmonization and things working together. So people have their gifts, right? British cynicism. I'm part British, so I can say that. But you have people that also have those spiritual gifts. And a lot of Africans are like that. People are open to different. Some people don't dream at all. Just don't dream. They say everybody dreams. Like if you put and they say you just don't remember your dreams. But there are people that don't have any dreams. So dreams are that aspect. I knew a Mauritanian. he just had the most amazing dream. Every morning he'd come and he'd tell me these incredibly elaborate dreams. And he'd like go, I visited Switzerland last night. I'm not making this up. And he would say, they have an amazing airport and they have these stairs that move. You know, and he would describe real things that I knew about. Yeah, just amazing. So this, and then he says, it is these two fruits, which is shame, the haya, the modesty. Modesty is a better word, but shame is part of it, just feeling that shame. And the mushahada, the witnessing, it is these two fruits that إلى هاتين الثمرتين أشار رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم بقوله الإحسان أن تعبد الله كأنك تراه. أشار إلى الثمرة الثانية وهي المشاهدة الموجبة للتعظيم كمن يشاهد ملكا عظيما فإنه يعظمه إذ ذاك بالضرورة. وقوله فإن لم تكن تراه فإنه يراك أشار إلى الثمرة الأولى إن لم تكن من أهل المشاهدة التي هي مقام المقربين فاعلم أنه يراك فكن من أهل الحياء الذي هو مقام أصحاب اليمين. فلما فسر الإحسان أول مرة بالمقام الأعلى رأى أن كثيرا من الناس قد يعجزون عنه فنزل عنه إلى مقام الآخر. It's so beautiful. So he's saying these two fruits, al-haya and mushahada, the Prophet ﷺ indicated them when he spoke about ihsan in saying that ihsan, this state of ihsan, is to worship Allah as if you see Him. And then this is a reference to the second fruit, which is witnessing, that necessitates exaltation. That when you're in a state of mushahada, you begin to show ta'zim, yu'azzam. And that's why, how do you begin the prayer? Allahu Akbar. That's ta'zim. Allahu Akbar. You tu'azzim Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because the prayer, you're supposed to enter into mushahada in the prayer. But he's saying, the Prophet ﷺ said that, and kaman yushahidu malikan, it's like seeing a great king. If you're in the presence of a great king and you know that this king can say off with his head, and that was the beauty of the ancient world. We don't have those metaphors as much anymore, although tyrants are like that, but not. It's not like the king. But the idea of the king, you know, the arbitrary king that could do whatever he wants, that he was a metaphor for the divine in the world, you know, off with his head. So if you see a great king, you're going to feel that in your heart. You don't want to do anything that's going to upset him in his presence. And the joker, the jester, is an interesting character, because the jester is actually from the Ottoman Turks. The jester came into Europe from the Muslims. And the purpose of the jester was he was the one who was completely outrageous. And he was able to say things to the king that nobody else could say. And there's a great metaphor in the jester and his role in the world. I mean, often comedians play that role. They say the most outrageous things, and if you said it in a speech, they'd say off with his head. But because the comedian says it, he just says, hey, I was just joking, right? It was just a joke. But often in their jokes is an immense amount of wisdom and truth. So the comedian today, the modern comedian, plays that role of the jester in the past, speaking truth to power, but doing it in a way that doesn't scare the power so much they'll say off with his head. Well, they might nowadays. Guys have a bad sense of humor. So then he says, and then when the Prophet said, if you do not see him, فَإِن لَمْ تَكُنْ تَرَاهُ, so that's an indication of the mushahada. You worship him as if you see him, and if you don't see him, at least you know that he sees you. So that's the first fruit, which is the shame. You're aware of God, so you feel modest before God. And so he's saying the first one is for the people of witnessing, ahlul mushahada. And that's the muqam of the muqarrabin. They're also called the sabiqun. As-sabiqun, as-sabiqun, ulaika al-muqarrabun. Those are the people, the outstrippers. The ones that went ahead of everybody. Sabaqa al-mufarridun. Those unique, distinct people. But then he said, because they know that Allah, that's the muqarrabin. فَعْلَمْ أَنَّهُ يَرَى فَكُنْ مِنْ أَهْلِ الْحَيَاةِ. But if you can't be from amongst the people of mushahada, at least you know that he sees you. And so be from the people of shame or modesty. And that's the maqam of the companions of the right, ashab al-yamin. So you have the muqarrabun and ashab al-yamin. Don't be from the ashab al-shimal. That's the other group, the people of the left. And so he says, so when the Prophet explained to us that ihsan, in the first time, he gave the highest maqam, the muqarrabin. But then, out of his mercy, in realizing that most of his community could not achieve that maqam, so out of his mercy, he said, well, there's also a second. If you can't be from that first, at least be from the second. And those are the people that know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So he came down to the second maqam, that they're aware that God sees them. وَاعْلَمْ أَنَّ الْمُرَاقَبَةَ لَا تَسْتَقِيمُ حَتَّى يَتَقَدَّمَ قَبْلَهَا الْمُشَارَطَةُ وَالْمُرَابَطَةُ وَيَتَأَخَّرُ عَنْهَا الْمُحَاسَبَةُ وَالْمُعَاقَبَةُ. Now know that this muraqaba will not be straight. It won't be, you won't be able to rectify it as a state until it is preceded by musharata, setting conditions, and then murabata, being vigilant about those conditions, which is followed by muhasaba, reckoning, and muaqaba, taking to account. Now these four things, if you have the book Agenda for Changing Our Condition, the exercises are taken from Ibn Juzayy al-Kalbi, indirectly. This was his technique. And so it's mentioned in there how you do that. So if you don't have that book, it's a useful book that Zaytuna published. So it's a waqf for Zaytuna. If you have that book will give you this system. Because he's saying, if you want to achieve this, here's how you do it. And it's in that book. That book explains it, so I won't go into a lot of detail about it. فأما المشارطة فهي اشتراط العبد على نفسه التزام الطاعة وترك المعاصي. So the condition that you put upon yourself is the servant's condition on his nafs, on his self, that he will adhere to obedience and he will leave disobedience. And as for murabata, which is the being vigilant about, yurabitu, it is the mu'ahadat al-abd li rabbi ala dharik, that you hold to that covenant. So you watch it, continually hold to it. ثم بعد المشارطة والمرابطة في أول الأمر تكون المراقبة إلى آخره وبعد ذلك يحاسب العبد نفسه على ما اشترطه وعاهد عليه فإن وجد نفسه قد أوفى بما عاهد الله عليه حمد الله وإن وجد نفسه قد حل عقد المشارطة ونقض عهد المرابطة عاقب النفس عقابا يزجرها عن العودة إلى مثل ذلك ثم عاد إلى المشارطة والمرابطة وحافظ على المراقبة ثم اختبر بالمحاسبة فهكذا يكون إلى أن يلقى الله تعالى وبالله توفيق ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم فافهم. So, after you have made this condition and you're vigilant about it in the beginning, so you start out, we did 40 days because tamam al-ribat 40 yawman, that ribat is completed in 40 days. It's a weak hadith, but that's where the Jama'at Tabligh get that idea of khuruj for 40 days. It's so fadail al-a'mal. It's for doing virtuous things. And then he says, so after that, after you do this, you maintain this vigilance. So turaqibu nafsik, you watch yourself until it becomes second nature. So whatever you're doing, being vigilant about the prayers, being vigilant about your tongue, being vigilant about your ears, being vigilant about your eyes, whatever it is, you watch until it becomes second nature. And then you look at yourself, and if you have fulfilled the covenant that you made with God, you praise God, alhamdulillah, and feel gratitude, Allah increases you. And if you find that you're self-stinted and that you have failed to keep that covenant of the condition, and you broke your promise in being vigilant about this, you have to punish yourself. You have to do something that takes the self to account. I'll give you an example. Ibn Wahb, one of the great commenters and muhaddithin, he was a great Maliki scholar as well. He said, that he was having trouble controlling his tongue. So he decided that he would make an oath in the morning, if he backbit anybody, that he would fast the next day. So that's mu'aqaba. So the covenant, the musharata, I'm not going to backbite. And then he watched himself during the day. If he did, he would fast the next day. He said it got to the point where he was fasting all the time and it was being more difficult. This is a real story. So he decided to change the mu'aqaba, the penalty. And he did it that he would give a dinar, which is a lot of money. It's probably about $100. So he said he'll give sadaqah of the dinar, the gold. And so he would do that, and he said his love of money eliminated his backbiting. Because fasting was easy for him, but giving up money was harder. So that's what he did. So, you have many stories like that, but the point is they were really serious about implementing these things. And this is one of the things about us as a modern Muslim community. We read all this stuff. We read the Quran, we see all these injunctions, we see all these, but people aren't on an active path to really try to implement these things. But this is the purpose of your life. It's to perfect the soul. It's to move towards perfection. And the beauty of this path is if you don't complete it in this life, Allah will complete it in the next life. If you set out to memorize the Quran and you're consistent in it, if you don't memorize it, by the time you die, an angel comes and teaches you it in the grave, and you'll be raised with the hufal. إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Actions are by intentions. So people should at least be intending and working to do these things. Whoever memorizes 40 hadiths in the weak hadith, this is a weak hadith, but if they memorize it, they're raised up with the scholars on the Day of Judgment. That's not an insignificant thing. That's why Imam Nawawi made those 40 hadiths, to facilitate for people then that's himmah. You should want to be amongst those people. And then he says, you punish yourself in order to stop it from going back and returning to something like that, one of those disobedience. And then, ثُمَّ عَادَ إِلَى الْمُشَارَطَةِ وَالْمُرَابَطَةِ, and then go back to making the condition, being vigilant about it, and then guarding. وَحَافِظَ عَلَى الْمُرَاقَبَةِ. So you're guarding this vigilant awareness, and then you test yourself with reckoning. You take yourself to account. Muhasabah is something, and the Christians do that. It's something monks do. Ibn Omar saw a monk who had two bags. One had black stones, and the other had white stones. And he saw him once putting black stones in and white stones. And he asked him what he was doing. And he said he was taking himself to account for that day to see how many good deeds he'd done and how many bad deeds. The black stones were bad deeds, the white stones were good deeds. And then he would count and see which one outweighed the other as a way of reckoning, taking himself to account. So that's what he's talking about, reckoning the self. فَهَكَذَا يَكُونُ إِلَى أَنْ يَلْقَى اللَّهِ. And you should be like this until you meet God. And with Allah's tawfiq. So he began it with tawfiq, and he ended it with tawfiq. That it's a tawfiq from Allah, and there's no power and strength save through God, and Allah is the exalted. So understand this, fafham. The next bab is called, I'd like to finish this book before you all go. The next bab ما يتعلق أيضا بالمراقبة والإحسان والبذل فيما أعطي والإحسان بعد الإيمان والتقوى. This is the chapter that is related to muraqaba, this vigilance, awareness of God, ihsan, this state of excellence, of spiritual excellence, and then expenditure from what God has given you, and ihsan after iman and taqwa. قوله تعالى ليس على الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات جناح فيما طعموا إذا ما اتقوا وآمنوا وعملوا الصالحات ثم اتقوا وآمنوا ثم اتقوا وأحسنوا والله يحب المحسنين. So there is no blame on people who believe and do righteous deeds. There's no blame on them. There's no junah. There's no sin in what they've eaten, if they have taqwa and they believe and they do righteous deeds, and then they have taqwa after that, and then they believe and do righteous deeds, and then they have ihsan, they ahsanu, and Allah loves the muhsinin. Fiha ta'wilan. There's two interpretations of this verse. أحدهما لما نزل تحريم الخمر قال قوم من الصحابة رضي الله عنهم كيف من مات منا وهو يشربها فنزلت الآية معلمة أنه لا جناح على من شربها قبل التحريم لأنه لم يعص الله بشربها حينئذ. والآخر أن المعنى رفع الجناح على المؤمنين فيما طعموا من المطاعم إذا اجتنبوا الحرام منها. وعلى هذا أخذها عمر رضي الله عنه وهو طريق بعض الطوائف الصوفية ممسكين عن الحرام عن إطعام المسلمين الطعام. وقول عمر رضي الله عنه حين قال لقدامى إنك إذا اتقيت الله اجتنبت ما حرم عليك، وكان قدامى قد شربها واحتج بهذه الآية على رفع الجناح عنه فقال له عمر رضي الله عنه أخطأت التأويل. So he says there are two interpretations. The first is that when the prohibition of alcohol or intoxicants was revealed, a certain group of the Sahaba said, radiyallahu anhum, what's our condition if we die and we've already imbibed alcohol? And so this verse came down informing them that there was no harm in what they had done because they drank it before it was prohibited. And also because they hadn't been disobedient to Allah by drinking it at that time. Because if Allah didn't prohibit it, there's nothing. It's like a new Muslim who does something that they don't know is haram and then they find out later. They're not taken into account like somebody who already knew. I had a friend who became Muslim in Afghanistan years ago. He's an English Muslim. And he told me that he went to Afghanistan to smoke hashish. And he used to go to this hashish den and he'd smoke. And I don't know about this, but apparently in Afghanistan they have like the best hashish for people that smoke hashish. So he used to go and he'd smoke this hashish and he'd be stoned. And next door there was this man who used to read the Quran all the time. So he'd be like in his hashish haze and he'd be hearing the Quran. So he asked some of the other people in the hashish den, what was that? And they said, that's God speaking. And he said it was just really, maybe because he was on hashish, but it really had an impact on him. So he went, he stayed there quite a while and he actually became fluent in Pushtun. But he actually went and he asked this man to teach him the Quran. And he said, oh, you have to become Muslim before I can do that. So he did that. And he started learning the Quran, and he told me that one night, it was his first Ramadan, and the girl that he'd gone with, he married her, and one of the Afghan people came and told him that during Ramadan you couldn't sleep with your, wife, and he just slammed the door. He thought it was some kind of crazy Afghan cultural thing. So he didn't know. So people aren't taken into account until they know. They have to learn, but it takes time. So those type of things, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgives people. So he says, the second meaning is Allah has removed blame on the believers in what they eat from amongst their food as long as they avoid the haram. So any food you want to eat, as long as it's not haram, there's no blame. If you want to eat good food, some people have camembert cheese, other people have cream cheese. That's the idea, is that if you have expensive cheese or poor cheese, there's no blame on you as long as it's halal. So that's another interpretation of the verse, that anything you eat, as long as it's halal, is acceptable for you. And then he says, and that is the opinion of Sayyidina Umar radiyallahu anhu, and it is the path of certain of the Sufi groups who hold who avoid completely anything prohibited. And then I'm sure there's a tahrif in the book, because an it'am al-muslimin at-ta'am. It might mean and feeding other Muslims anything that's haram, but Allahu a'lam. I'd have to check against the makhtuta, but it doesn't make sense as far as I can tell the way it's written. وَقَوْلُ عُمَرْ رَضِيَ اللَّهُ عَنْهُ حِينَ قَالَ لِقُدَامَ, and Umar said to Qudama, one of the Sahaba, Qudama ibn Mad'un al-Qurashi. He was one of the Sahaba, and he had taken wine before. إِنَّكَ إِذَا اتَّقَيْتَ اللَّهَ اجْتَنَبْتَ مَا حَرَّمَ عَلَيْكَ. If you have taqwa, you'll avoid whatever Allah prohibited. وَكَانَ قُدَامَ قَدْ شَرِبَ. He had drunk wine before. وَاحْتَجَّ بِهَذِهِ الْآيَةِ. So he used this ayah as a proof to Omar that he hadn't sinned before. So Omar said to him, you're mistaken in your interpretation. So Omar didn't agree with that interpretation. وَقَوْلُهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى إِذَا مَا اتَّقَوْا وَآمَنُوا الْآيَةِ. So as long as they have taqwa and believe, and taqwa is repeated hyperbolically in rhetoric to really emphasize. It's repeated in these 3 times. And also it said because the first rutbah, the first rank, is taqwa where you fear shirk, associating with God. The second is the fear of disobedience. And the third is the fear of what has no harm in it as a way of avoiding what has harm. So the halal, you begin to worry about having too much of a good thing, because the more of the world you have, the more of a reckoning you'll have. So that's the idea. So understand this. And then he says, darajatu taqwa al-ula li'ammat al-muslimin. The first rank is for the general Muslims. وَالثَّانِيَةِ is for the khawas, the people of distinction. And the third, li khawas al-khawas, the people, the elect of the people of distinction. So understand this. فافهم. وقال بعض المتصوفة في كتاب التسهيل لعلوم التنزيل وقيل الأولى في الآية. I don't know. Some of these, the problem with the tahqiq of this book, I mean, may Allah reward him for doing it, because it's a beautiful book. But he definitely chooses the wrong words sometimes. Like he's got words down below that he says, and in another text it says this, and it's actually the better word. So the man that did the book, he's got some things. This doesn't make sense, because it's saying some of the Sufis say in the book, At-Tasheel li Ulum at-Tanzil, he wrote that book, so he wouldn't say it like that. So I don't know what the original said. It might say something like, and some of the Sufis, as I quoted in my book, At-Tasheel li Ulum at-Tanzil. I don't know what he means by that. وَقِيلَ الْأُولَى فِي الْآيَةِ لِلزَّمَانِ الْمَاضِي. Some say the first is for what's past, so the taqwa mentioned first is for what's past, وَالثَّانِيَ لِلْحَالِ, and the second is for the present, and the third is for the future. So these are different ways of looking at the verse. قَوْلُهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى وَأَحْسَنُوا, and then it ends by وَأَحْسَنُوا وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and they performed acts of ihsan, of virtue, of excellence, of beauty. يَحْتَمِلُ أَن يُرِيدَ الْإِحْسَانِ إِلَى النَّاسِ. It probably means, or one of the possible or probable meanings, is that God means that they do good to other people. Or it could mean they do good by being obedient to Allah. Ihsan fi ta'ati. So they're aware of God in their worship. وَهُوَ الْمُرَاقَبَةِ, and this is this vigilance or awareness of God. وَهَذَا أَرْجَحْ, and I prefer this opinion. This seems more likely. وَإِلَيْهِ أَدْرَجَتَ الْمُتَصَوِّفَ, and this is the way that the Sufis went in that. وَهَذَا أَرْجَحُ لِأَنَّهُ دَرَجَةٌ فَوْقَ التَّقْوَى, because it's a degree over taqwa. Ihsan is a degree over that. That's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, اتَّقَوْا وَأَحْسَنُوا. They had taqwa, and then not only that, they went above and beyond the call of duty. So taqwa is your duty, the ihsan is above and beyond the duty. And then he says, وَلِذَلِكَ ذَكَرُهُ فِي الْمَرَّةِ الثَّالِثَةِ. That's why it's mentioned on the third time. اتَّقَوْا وَأَحْسَنُوا. وَلِذَلِكَ قَالَتَ الصُّوفِيَّةُ. And that's the reason why the Sufi said, الْمَقَامَاتُ ثَلَاثَةً. The stations are 3. مقام الإسلام, the station of Islam, that's the first taqwa. ثُمَّ مقام الإيمان, the station of faith, that's the second taqwa. ثُمَّ مقام الإحسان, and then the station of ihsan, that's the third. وَقَوْلُهُ إِنَّ اللَّهَ يَأْمُرُ بِالْعَدْلِ وَالْإِحْسَانِ. And when God says He commands to justice and virtue, those are the two. So it's not just your duty, but it's also, because justice is a duty, but mercy and compassion and virtue and all these other things, should be added on to what you're obliged to do. These are the things that are from what are called tahsiniyat. the things that embellish life and ornament life and make life really worth living are those qualities that are in the world that Allah encourages from virtue and ihsan. فَافْهَمْ, so understand this. وَفَّقَنَ اللَّهُ وَإِيَّاكُمْ لِمَا يُحِبُّهُ اللَّهُ وَرَسُولُهُ وَبِاللَّهِ تَوْفِيقٌ. May Allah give us tawfiq, and also to you, to those things that He loves and that His Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam loves, and with Allah is tawfiq. So, let's see. I think I can finish this tomorrow. Oh, we don't? So do you want me to finish it? I'm just going to go through it then quickly. وَقَوْلُهُ تَبَارَكَ وَتَعَالَى فِي سُورَةِ الْأَعْرَافِ. This is called the chapter of fear and hope. It's a beautiful chapter. باب الخوف والرجاء. وقوله تبارك وتعالى في سورة الأعراف وادعوه خوفا وطمعا إن رحمة الله قريب من المحسنين. جمع الله الخوف والرجاء وهو الطمع ليكون العبد خائفا راجيا. قال الله تعالى يرجون رحمته ويخافون عذابه. فإن موجب الخوف معرفة سطوة الله وشدة عقابه، وموجب الرجاء معرفة رحمة الله وعظيم ثوابه. قال الله تعالى نبئ عبادي أني أنا الغفور الرحيم وأن عذابي هو العذاب الأليم. من عرف فضل الله رجاه ومن عرف عدله خافاه. وكذلك جاء في الأثر لو وزن خوف المؤمن ورجاؤه لاعتدل، إلا أنه يستحب أن يكون العبد طول عمره يغلب عليه الخوف ليقوده إلى فعل الطاعات وترك السيئات، وأن يغلب عليه الرجاء عند حضور الموت لقوله صلى الله عليه وسلم لا يموتن أحدكم إلا وهو يحسن الظن بالله تعالى. اعلم أن الخوف على 3 درجات. So he says, call on him out of fear and hope. Tama, desire, covetousness. Surely the mercy of God is close to the people of ihsan. So Allah's mercy is close to the people of ihsan. Allah has united fear and hope in this verse. And in reality it's tama. It's this desire inside for something. So it's in order for the servant to have both fear and hope. Allah says they hope for the mercy of God and they fear His punishment. So these two go together, fear and hope. The poet said, وَلَا بُدَّ مِن نَعْلَيْهِ خَوْفٍ مَعَ الرَّجَى. You have to have the 2 sandals of fear and hope. Some say it's the 2 wings, that you can't fly without the 2 of them, fear and hope. And then he says, فَإِنَّ مُوجِبَ الْخَوْفِ مَعْرِفَةُ سَطْوَةِ اللَّهِ, that khawf results from knowledge of Allah's divine power, that Allah can, the Lord of tsunamis. I mean, that's where fear comes from. Because God is merciful and compassionate, but God is also the Lord of orphans, the Lord of hurricanes, the Lord of all of these majestic things that occur in the world that are frightening and terrible. Allah is Dhul Jalali wal Ikram. He's the Lord of majesty. He seizes people. He can take you at any time. He can take your child. He can take your life and limb. He can take all your property. That is God also. It's not just, all the nice things that happen in life. No, Allah is both. He gives and He takes. And so it's an awareness of that power of God. And it's Dajjalic, those people that try to present God as everything's nice, everybody's going to heaven, it's all going to be wonderful. That's not reality. Reality is that there's people enslaved into prostitution. There's pedophiles that rape children. That's also part of the world. It's all these terrifying aspects of the world. And Allah lets those things happen. It's part of His sunnah in His creation, that He's the creator of good and evil. And we're not Manichaeans. We don't separate God into, there's good God and then there's this Ahriman, bad God. Or if God's all good, why does He allow evil? That's not a Muslim problem. It's never been a Muslim problem. We accept God the way God has revealed Himself to us, and we don't have those problems. فَعَالٌ لِمَا يُرِيدُ. He does whatever He wants. أُلْقِي هَؤُلَاءِ فِي النَّارِ وَلَا أُبَالِي. I throw these into the fire and I have no concern, none whatsoever, no emotion. وَأُلْقِي هَؤُلَاءِ فِي الْجَنَّةِ وَلَا أُبَالِي. And I put these into paradise and I have no emotion. تَعَالَى اللَّهُ عَمَّا يَصِفُونَ. That's the transcendent God, and that God is real. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is also an immanent God, involved in His creation, filled with mercy and benevolence, and that's the tajalli that we hope for. That's the manifestation of God that we desire in our lives. But both are God, and to reject one is to reject the other. Both are God. We don't separate. We're people of tawheed. We believe that God is one, but God has attributes. And those attributes are real. And that's what fear is. Fear is a recognition of that aspect of God that's terrifying, that can expel us from His mercy, can deprive us of all good, and it's tard al-bab, to be thrown away from the door. There's a wonderful scene in Candide, Voltaire's Candide, at the end when he goes, Professor Pangloss. Who's the other character? Candide. Professor Pangloss and Candide. They're traveling around the world. Pangloss is trying to work out if this is the best of all possible worlds. He's a German metaphysician. And Candide is just trying to find out what's going on. Like, what's the world about? So they end up in Turkey. And they go to this Sufi Shaykh. He's going to give them all the answers to the world. And so they knock on the door, and this very austere Sufi Shaykh answers the door of the Zawiya. And he's, what do you want? And Dr. Pangloss is like, you have to explain to us, is this the best of all possible worlds? Why do people suffer in the world? Why is there suffering? And the Sufi looks at me and he says, what does the captain of the ship care about the rats in the hull? And then he slams the door. That's transcendence. That's an aspect of God, and that's what he was teaching him. It's actually quite a brilliant insight. That was a lesson, because that is the nature of evil. There's an aspect of God that is so transcendent, so frightening, so terrifying, we can't comprehend it, we can't understand it, but it's God. And we accept it, we're in submission to it. We say Allahu Akbar. But then hope is engendered out of knowledge of His mercy. That He gives immense rewards. That we're healthy. We have so many blessings. We have water to drink. We have food to eat. We can go to sleep. When we drink, we can urinate. When we eat, we can defecate. We have spouses. We have children. We have houses. We have weather that is just right for human habitation. Our planet's protected. We have all of these amazing things. And then He gives us these incredible tools and gifts to do things. We have commerce from all around the world. And we have people that are doctors that work hard so they can heal our ills and treat us. We have pediatricians that have compassion for our children. We have mothers that respond in the middle of the night, even though they're exhausted, to the crying of their children, and hold them in their arms and rock them. We have people that are so outraged by the injustice of the world that they give up everything, their careers, their stature, to fight for the truth. People that will die. They'll literally go up against the gun because they know something's right, and they'll defend that right. We have people like that. The world's filled with that. And that's what Helen Keller said, the world's filled with suffering, but don't forget it's also filled with the overcoming of suffering. And that's what hope is about. And that's why they have to have this balance. You can't have one without the other. If you have one, you'll go crazy. You'll become the Richard Dawkins who rejects God and sees all the evil in the world and writes about how terrible religion is and all these things. Because all he sees is the evil of religion. When we come here, do we see the evil of Islam in this city? Really? Look at these people. Look at these amazing people. Look how they go to the prayer. Getting up before dawn, there's people waiting to get into the Roda at 2:30 in the morning. They sit and wait for an hour just to go into the thing. And then they'll give you anything. People, really. They make room for you. Look how crowded it is. You know how people behave in large crowds? Look at just the adab of the people. This is the Islam that we see. This isn't, it's charity. Look at all these people giving charity. Look at this. This hotel is a waqf for poor people, to help people. Somebody, the king made it a waqf. So we're staying here, we're eating this food, we're paying rent and all these things. That money that we're paying, a large portion of it is going to help people. That's from love of God. That's from religion. That's what we see. That's our experience of religion. So all of these things in the world that you see that are good, that's what gives us hope. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, tell my servants, I am the forgiving. I am the merciful. Tell my servants. He tells the Prophet, Nabbi ibadi. Tell my servants, I am the merciful. I am the forgiving. But also remind them, my punishment is my chastisement is fierce, it's painful. They go together. Man arafa fadlullahi raja'u. If you know the bounty of Allah, you'll have nothing but hope. Wa man arafa adrahu khafa. But if you know the justice of God, you'll have fear. That's why you need to know the balance and the ya'muru bil adli wal ihsan. He commands to both justice and ihsan, and this bounty. So God commands to both. And there is an athar, a saying that's come down, if the fear and the hope of a believer was weighed, the scales would be balanced. That's the best state. And it's mustahab, and it's said, or rather, although it is better during the life of a person to have a little more fear, because that fear will protect him and keep him obedient and help him avoid disobedience or foul deeds and actions. But as he gets older and closer to death, he should have more hope. So when you're young and it's easier to be disobedient, it's better to have that fear as you get older. And then when you're almost dead, you should give up all fear. Don't be afraid of God. I mean, that's the sunnah, is that when you're on your deathbed, don't let anybody tell you about the fire. Have complete trust that God's merciful and the compassionate, and forget all of those warnings and all of those no, just have a good opinion of God. Ana inda dhanni abdi bi. I am in the opinion of my servant. So that's the sunnah, to do that. And then the Prophet ﷺ said, let not any one of you, which is in Sahih Muslim, let none of you have a bad opinion of God. Don't die with a bad opinion of God. Have a good opinion of God, that all His promises are true, that you're going to be in paradise with the prophets and the saints. And know that fear has 3 degrees. The first is when it's weak, it occurs to the heart, but it doesn't have an effect, neither inward or outward. And that's almost like not having any fear at all. So there's something, you're aware, astaghfirullah, but it's not stopping you. And the second is where it's stronger, it wakes you out of your heedlessness, and it compels you to be upright. And the third is so strong that it leads to despair. And you actually are convinced that God's singled you out. He's going to zap you with a bolt of lightning any minute. And that is incapacitating, and it's actually a religious neuroses. It's not a healthy state at all. Or in worst case scenario, psychosis. So he says, وَهَذَا لَا يَجُوزُ وَخَيْرُ الْأُمُورِ أَوْسَطُهَا. This one is not permissible. And the best of affairs is that middle one, where it prevents you from doing wrong and it compels you to do right. That's the best state of fear. وَالنَّاسُ فِي الْخَوْفِ عَلَى ثَلَاثِ مَقَامَاتٍ. And that people have 3 stations when it comes to fear. فَخَوْفُ الْعَامَّةِ مِنَ الذُّنُوبِ وَخَوْفُ الْخَاصَّةِ مِنَ الْخَاتِمَةِ وَخَوْفُ الْخَاصَّةِ الْخَاصَّةِ مِنَ السَّابِقَةِ فَإِنَّ الْخَاتِمَةَ مَبْنِيَةٌ عَلَيْهَا. So people are of 3 stations with fear. The first is the fear of the common people from wrong actions. The fear of the people of distinction from a bad end. They have a bad seal. And then the fear of the elect from amongst the people of distinction who actually fear the sabiqah. what was written in the wombs of their mothers when the angel was told about Shaqi or Sa'id. So that's the highest, because the Khatima, your seal, is based on the Sabiqa. How you end was based on your beginning. And that's why an-nihayat fil bidayat. The end is always in the beginning. If you see a student who's studying hard in the beginning, it's an indication that he's going to have an auspicious end in his education. If he starts out lazy, more likely than not, he's going to end up lazy. Not necessarily, but... And then he says, وَالرَّجَاءُ عَلَى ثَلَاثِ دَرَجَاتٍ. Hope is also on 3 degrees. The first, الأولى رجاء رحمة الله مع تسبب فيها بفعل طاعته وبترك معصيته، فهذا هو الرجاء المحمود. الثانية الرجاء مع التفريط والعصيان، فهذا غرور. والثالث أن يقوى الرجاء حتى يبلغ إلى الأمن، فهذا حرام. So the first is where you hope for the mercy of God, and you're working also by doing good deeds, by being in a state of obedience, and by avoiding prohibitions. And this is a praiseworthy state of hope. The second is a hope that's excessive and becomes disobedient, and it's where you're deluded. God's merciful. Allah arhamar rahimin. Ya akhi, enjoy life. Don't worry. God's not going to do anything to you. He's not going to punish you. We're Muslims. Everything's fine. That's a delusional state that people are in. And the third one, أن يقوى الرجاء حتى يبلغ إلى الأمن, where they're just completely convinced. I've got a ticket to paradise and nothing's going to stop me. I've booked my suite in God's hotel, and it's luxury villa up at the top, overlooking all the rivers. And he says that's haram, to feel so secure. And Abu Bakr, who's the example of fear and hope, Abu Bakr said, if one of my feet was in paradise and the other was out, I still wouldn't feel safe from the design of God. Not until both feet are firmly planted in paradise does he give up his. So that's important. وَالنَّاسُ فِي الرَّجَاءِ عَلَى ثَلَاثِ مَقَامَاتٍ. And people concerning hope are on 3 stations. فَمَقَامُ الْعَامَّةِ رجاء ثواب الله، ومقام الخاصة رجاء رضوان الله، ومقام خاصة الخاصة رجاء لقاء الله حبا فيه وشوقا إليه إن رحمة الله قريب من المحسنين وبالله توفيق. So people concerning raja, this hope, have 3 stations. The first station is the general people, and it's a hope for God's reward. He's going to reward you. The second is the station of the elect. It's a hope for the pleasure of God. You want that God's pleased with you. More than you want anything from God, you want to give to God. That's a higher station because it's love. And then the third is the elect from amongst the people of distinction, and that is hoping to meet God. You want to meet God. You're looking forward to meeting God. And we should all look forward to meeting God, because this is going to be the director's commentary. You get to watch the whole thing and have it all explained to you. Allah says, I'm going to explain everything on that day. You're going to understand why you are all differing. Why is there all this confusion? Why do we have all these religions? Why do we have all these wars? He's going to explain it all. Everybody's going to say, oh, that's what it meant. Seriously, nobody has patience. They say it's too confusing. Well, my father told me he didn't understand Hamlet until he'd read it 50 times. There's people that work to understand things. This assumption is it's all supposed to be clear and worked out. Why? It's only through work that you really appreciate things. So that's what we're preparing for. The Day of Judgment. And then that highest station, And then he says, Inna rahmatullahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. The mercy of God is close to the people of ihsan. And with God is tawfiq. So it's almost time for Maghrib. And this is Bab al-Tawbah. And then he ends it with Bab al-Ikhlas. the book of the Station of Sincerity. So inshallah, may Allah give us muraqaba, khawf, raja, tawbah, and ikhlas. I'll inshallah get another time for this. Maybe we could do it after